Hello, everyone. I'm Hans Engel from the Directors Guild of Canada. Welcome to our 22nd episode of DGC Masterclass via Zoom and our final Picture Editor Masterclass as we look to putting the series on a hiatus on August 6th. These are unprecedented times beyond anyone's imagining, which makes me even more grateful that you are joining us tonight. With these masterclasses, we're going behind the scenes and talking to some of the top creatives in the industry in Canada and internationally, covering directors, designers, picture and sound editors, with 2 episodes every week. You'll receive a new invitation with a specific link to tune in, and I'm also posting the links on my Instagram. So far, we've had Emmy-winning director Jean-Marc Vallée, Emmy-winning editor Kelly Dixon, Oscar-winning designers David and Sandy Wasco, a special event with brilliant award-winning filmmaker Jeff Barnaby, 2-time Oscar-nominated doc filmmaker Firas Fayyad, 2-time Oscar-winning sound editor Karen Baker-Landers, Oscar and Palme d'Or nominee Adam McGoyan, Oscar-nominated designers KK Barrett and Patrice Vermette, maverick filmmaker Bruce McDonald, Oscar-nominated director, writer, producer, and actor Sarah Polley, groundbreaking director Clement Virgo in conversation with Cameron Bailey, history-making 2019 Academy Award-winning production designer Hannah Beekler, prolific director and actor Helen Shaver, Oscar-winning legendary Star Wars picture editor Paul Hirsch, award-winning groundbreaking director Mina Shum, renowned director, writer, and actor Casey Lemons, a special edition celebrating the release of Christian Sparks' sophomore film Hammer, world-renowned production designer Claude Perret, Emmy-nominated director, writer, and producer Veena Sood, and Emmy-nominated BAFTA-winning director Kari Skoglund. All these can be found on the DGC National and DGC Ontario YouTube channels. Tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator. He has worked for such notable companies as Netflix, AMC, Paramount, Showtime, Disney, MGM, Sci-Fi, Sony Pictures, and many more. Just some of his editing credits include Spinning Out, V-Wars, Ransom, Dark Matter, Into the Badlands, Hemlock Grove, Rookie Blue, Lost Girl, Dead Like Me, Odyssey 5, and the 4400. He also directed episodes of Dark Matter and webisodes for Lost Girl. As one of the co-founders of the Canadian Cinema Editors, he continues to pursue improving the industry profile of editors and elevating the importance of their craft. Welcome, Paul Day.
Hello, Hans. How are you?
There you are. I'm well. Thank you for joining us again tonight. Great to have
Hey,
you.
this is it's sad to know that we're not going to continue this. So let's hope that we have the ability to do something maybe in the fall.
We'll be doing more, no doubt
Excellent.
about it. The
Excellent.
response has been incredible. I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's featured guest. He began as an assistant editor on several feature films, including the Academy Award nominated As Good as It Gets for editor Richard Marks and director James L. Brooks. His first solo feature as editor was The Yards for James Gray, which premiered in competition at the Cannes Film Festival in 2000. He edited Teddy Bear's Picnic for Harry Shearer, 1 Hour Photo for Mark Romanek, Hide and Seek for John Polson, The Family Stone for Thomas Bazooka, his work receiving an ACE Eddie nomination, and Street Kings for David Ayer. He also edited Shattered Glass and Breach for director Billy Ray. With Paul Rubel, he co-edited Public Enemies for director Michael Mann. In 2011, he teamed with Bazooka again for Monte Carlo. At Marvel Studios, Ford co-edited Captain America, The First Avenger with Robert Dalva for director Joe Johnson, Iron Man 3 with Peter S. Elliott for Shane Black, and The Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron, both with Lisa Lassick for director Joss Whedon. For Joe and Anthony Russo, he co-edited with Matt Schmidt Captain America the Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame. In 2019, he returned to work with Bazooka on Let 'Em Go. He's currently editing The Comey Rule, shot in Toronto, about James Comey and Donald Trump for director Billy Ray. In Los Angeles, welcome Jeffrey Ford.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, good to see you.
Great to have you here.
Thank you
Uh,
so much for the invitation. This is a huge honor. I can't believe I'm on this list. It's crazy.
It's fantastic. You absolutely deserve to be on it.
Oh, I don't, but it's super cool to be on a list with Adam McGoyan. This is so cool.
Absolutely. Before I turn it over to Jeff and Paul, I'd like to point out to our viewers the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in questions throughout the evening into that box that you'll see when you type in there, and Paul will try to get to as many questions as he can, but may not get to all of them. That's it for me. Paul, Jeff, really looking forward to this conversation. Over to you. See you at the end.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Hans.
Hans. Thank you. So a little story, Jeff, that it was the Directors Guild of Canada Awards back in October, and I was attending, and Nikki and Ellie at Take Five approached me and said, we're going to be working with Jeffrey Ford soon. You guys should think about doing something. And I said, that would be great. I would love to have him come in and do a Q&A. And then when Hans caught wind of it and started organizing it, I got a job in Malta. And I wasn't able to attend when you were doing the Q&A downtown in downtown Toronto. So when Hans said, I'd like to get Jeff back to do sort of a national sort of world broadcast of questions, I'm like, I have to be able to get it. I have to be the guy who gets to talk to him, because I have followed your career for quite a while, in the sense that there's some rather really intimate, small, really lovely movies. And then your career went into the stratosphere, into the $1 billion range. I think I made a note quickly that out of the top 20 most highest grossing movies, your movies occupy the number 1, 5, 8, 10, 18, and 20 spot, for a grand total of about $10 billion. So you must be doing something right with Marvel. But I want to, a little later on, we're going to talk about sort of just the sense of working on a scope of a movie that big and working on a movie, say, like Crazy Heart or The Arts. But right off the bat, which I just like to do to get everybody warmed up, is just give us the Reader's Digest version of Jeffrey Ford, where you started, how you got into what you're doing, and we just want a little background of who you are.
Oh boy. Well, thank you. That was a very nice introduction. I really wanted to be a filmmaker since I was very young. I think I was in 4th or 5th grade, and my friends and I would make Super 8 movies, and we would make Spider-Man movies. My mom made us a Spider-Man costume, and so we would actually create little scenarios. They were silent films, but we would edit them in camera. Sometimes we'd cut them and do some visual effects and things, but it was really, down and dirty, but we had so much fun doing it. And that's where I started. So I feel kind of like I've been doing the same thing, since I was in 5th grade, but it's something that I really just, I don't know why I connected with it, but it just was something that I've always been passionate about. And when I left, I went to high school in Portland, Oregon, and we, I played hockey, by the way, there, and we would go to Vancouver and didn't always get beaten terribly by the kids up there who played a lot more than we did. But anyway, yeah, I grew up in Portland and then went to USC Film School because I sort of, was a big fan of Lucas and Spielberg growing up. All those big, sensational science fiction fantasy movies of the 70s and 80s. That's what I grew up on, and so I followed George Lucas, to USC basically, figuring that was like so many great filmmakers like Zemeckis came out of there, and Spielberg gave them money, and so it felt like that was the place where a lot was happening, and I always dreamed of getting to LA to where films were made, and I had an incredible experience at film school, met a lot of really good friends, a lot of whom I ended up working with, and a lot of whom I remained friends with over the years. So huge influence on me was going to USC Film School.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say at USC, is that where you discovered, you said you wanted to be a filmmaker, but when was the kernel of wanting to be an editor, or at least moving into that realm post-production?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've never thought of myself as an editor only. I've always thought of myself as a filmmaker. I mean, editing is what I love to do the most. I love sound and post-production and stuff, and I just really, that was the thing that I had a really, good grasp of. And I also, I struggled a bit with, being able to play the political game of being a director or a writer, getting your stuff made. It was always difficult for me, and I just didn't have the same, a passion for it as I did for the actual act of shooting and cutting, like actually being on set, working, doing cinematography and editing. So it just was something that I really, it just gravitated to, and I enjoyed it so much. And I was able to, you start to get a reputation in school that, he likes to edit. He's pretty good at it. Why don't you get him? So it was that sort of thing, and just found some really interesting projects working with friends in school, things we made. And I always ended up being the guy who was, usually I was a camera assistant or the camera operator or the editor. Those were my jobs. And, and I ended up, really loving editing. When I got out of film school, I worked as a camera assistant for a while. And I went to school with James Gray, and he was one of my best friends. And we spent a lot of time together. He finally got through a miracle of putting together this script deal, he got a chance to make a film in New York, a movie called Little Odessa with Tim Roth and Moira Kelly, Vanessa Redgrave. And when he got the money to make this, we were like, oh my God, you made it. You did it. You're the first. And off he went, and he wanted me to join him on it because we were, we'd all worked on each other's stuff. And so I said, well, maybe I'll be in camera department. And that wasn't open. That was closed because there was a small crew, and the DP had already picked his crew. So he said, well, you can come into editorial and I'll tell, them they got to hire you. And so I went for this interview with the editor of the movie, because I wasn't the editor. They had the company, and he had hired this woman, Dorian Harris, who's one of my favorite people on earth. She's an incredible editor. And he, so I had to meet Dorian, and she's like, you're the political hire. I guess I got to hire you. Just don't mess it up, and hope you're nice. And we ended up becoming, friends forever. And it was an incredible experience. I went to New York. I did dailies while Dorian stayed in LA, and I basically sunk dailies, and I was on set with James watching dailies, taking notes, sending them back to Dorian. And she was cutting in LA. This was shot on film. This was in 1994.
Right.
And, that was my break. That's, if without James, I would have never made it in, and my story, as a lot of people's story, it's like, there's a lot of people who gave me a chance and helped me get a job, or get in the door, or get in the union, or get onto a bigger show, or get a chance to edit, or get a chance to edit a big movie. All those, every one of those people was the person I would say, without them, I wouldn't have made it. So there's many of those along the way.
Well, actually, eventually I want to get to asking you a little bit more details about sort of your influences. But I think a good transition would be working with James Gray. So eventually you cut The Yards, which would be your first feature, what it went in around 2000, I think, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we did Little Odessa in 94, and then I needed work. James was going to work on his script and work on his second film. A Little Odessa did really well. It won a Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival. He was becoming a really hot director, and he wanted to do another movie, more ambitious movie. So in the meantime, I was working, and I worked on, I was able to get on a crew thanks to a friend of mine, Tia Nolan, who's an editor. She hired me onto Richie Marx's crew on a movie. And I got on Richie's crew and worked with him for several years until we did a few movies together, culminating with As Good as It Gets, which was a Jim Brooks movie. I spent about a year and a half on that. It was a big production, very difficult production, but in the end turned out really a charming movie that was very well received. And I was tired. I was burned out as an assistant after that, and I decided I was going to take a little bit of a break. And it turned out to be a good break, because at the time James set up The Yards, which was the same more ambitious movie with Miramax, and they were going to finance it. And he said, you got to edit this. And I'm like, well, there's no way that I'm going to get on that movie. I don't have any credits, and I know I can do it, but who's gonna
you need somebody to vote for you.
Exactly. And Harvey Weinstein was the producer of the film, and he's a notorious person, and everybody knows his name today. And he was a difficult person back then, and very, 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 a tough guy to sway. And so James said, hey, if we can convince Harvey to hire you, you can do it. Who do you know that can vouch for you? And I'm like, I don't know anybody in town. I'm just like a lowly assistant editor, but I just worked with Jim Brooks. Let me call his office and see if he'll write me a letter of recommendation. It's the best I can think of doing. Maybe I'll write it for him. He'll sign it or something. So I called Jim's office and to find out how to send him a letter and see if he'd like beg him to write me a letter. And he ended up taking my call.
Oh, wow.
Right then. And he's like, let me call and see if I can talk to Harvey and give you a recommendation straight away. And he did. And it was it was somebody, a great director like Jim Brooks, you know, a towering talent, incredible writer, incredible filmmaker, Oscar-winning director who I loved working for, and but was so honored that he would take 5 minutes to make a call for me. Someone who had no contacts in the industry and no way to influence anybody. And he talked
Obviously, and it worked too. His
worked, I
influence
got the
worked.
job, and it turned out to be this incredible experience because James was and is one of the best filmmakers we've got going in the United States. I mean, he's a really amazing director with a truly singular vision about things. I mean, his movies are really unlike anyone else's. They have a real tone and feeling to them, and visually stunning and beautifully visually told, and
Well, for your
incredible
first film, I mean, what a cast! Yeah,
Oh yeah, the cast was the
and Charlize Theron and Mark Wahlberg,
Joaquin
Faye
Phoenix,
Dunaway, Joaquin Phoenix. I mean, that's a pretty good cast for
Ellen Burstyn. I mean, it was insane. Yeah, it was literally the best cast of all time. And
So you're working with your friend James, and you're
Yeah.
cutting your first movie. It's for Miramax, and this is probably in and around the time of the heyday of Miramax.
this was 98, 99. We shot it, and it didn't get finished. And there was a weird time where the Miramax people sort of disappeared for a while. Like Harvey wasn't around, and he disappeared for like a month at one point. And it's been documented in some books and stuff, but he was just gone, and we were cutting the movie and we weren't sure how we were going to finish it. And then one thing led to another, and we were able to get a version to, I believe it was Gilles Jacob, and get it into competition, to get it submitted for Cannes, try to get into competition. And it got selected, which sort of saved the movie because it made it legitimate, and it was a way we could really get it out there. And so it premiered at Cannes in 2000 in May, and
Wow.
Huge, really amazing experience. And I'll never forget, walking up the red carpet in the Palais, and, people standing ovation, all this crazy, it was nuts. I mean, it was like one of those things you're like, oh my God, this really happened.
Well, take a couple steps back from the premiere in Cannes, but so what was it like? So you're working with James, and then did Harvey ever come to the cutting room? Was it ever a moment where you had to work?
Oh, well, I mean, there was all sorts.
I mean, I don't want to scratch any
No.
wounds or
I
anything,
mean, it's we all everybody that worked at that studio, I think over the years has stories to tell. I mean, there were some really tough times when he was very harsh, and I think when you're making a movie, you a lot of people will, you show it to people and you get some really hard notes, and you have to deal with them. And a lot of the trick to making a film is not losing perspective on what you're doing. You can have a very influential and powerful producer tell you this sucks. You guys suck. You guys should be fired, which he did. And I think he might have fired us a couple of times, and then we just kind of never left. I don't know what happened, but he would come in, sort of spitting at us and telling us we were all terrible. And James was like, no, I'm making this is the thing I'm making, and this is what we're going to do. And it's good. And we know it's good. And we had enough confidence even then to know it was a good piece of material and a well-made film. So if you have to maintain, you have to make concessions to producers, you have to work with them, you have to be collaborative, but you can't, if you lose sight of the movie, then what are you doing? I mean, if you're just letting them tell you how to push the paint around, I don't think you're making anything anybody's ever going to want to see.
Sure. Did you feel a bit protected because you were working with James, your friend, or were
No.
was there the nerves of first movie dealing with a big studio?
I've never not felt like I was going to be fired, ever.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Never. It's always, you always feel that way. And I think if you do get to the point where you think you're not going to get fired, then I mean, I don't know. It's almost like, well, look, that was my first movie. We were all exposed. It could have been, at the end of the day, the movie got buried. I mean, Harvey buried it in the States. It never really got its release. It's since gone on. People have seen it on DVD. It's a stunningly beautiful movie. If you haven't seen it, it was shot by Harris Savitas, who's one of the greatest cinematographers that ever walked the earth. He's no longer with us, but he shot a number of movies for David Fincher. And
I think he shot Zodiac, didn't he?
He did, and he shot The Game, and he shot these incredible videos with Mark Romanek, who I worked with, and he did some of the most beautiful work you've ever seen. It's like Gordon Willis level artistry. We shot the movie with these antique lenses. We We pre-flashed and distressed the film to open up the black to create this sort of painterly black that James was looking for. So there's many things that we did, visually on that movie that were just sort of crazy and audacious. And you watch it today, it's stunningly beautiful.
No, it's a very good looking film.
Yeah, so it was a tough movie to make. We had problems with the edit that we worked through, like you do with any movie. But when there's a gun to your head, it's harder. And we had a lot of reshoots to do, and we all pulled together and did them. And Miramax had one idea about how the movie should end. James had another, and ultimately, it was a tough movie, but I learned a lot. We all learned a lot. It was, for a lot of us, it was only the second or third movie we'd worked on or made. So Matt Reeves also, who's a filmmaker who I really love and is a dear friend. He's done some of the Planet of the Apes movies recently. I think he's directing the Batman film right now. Matt wrote the yards with James and was around the whole time. So, it was a group of us that kept each other going. Like, we supported each other, and it was, this is your family when you're a filmmaker, and they, we were all trying to be there for each other on that movie. It was a fun experience. I look back on it very fondly. It's one of the best experiences I've had making a movie. I don't, it's unique because it was early for all of us. So
sure.
It's a novel. And when you find yourself in Cannes and you're asking, Roger Ebert for directions to the pizza place, it's like, pinch me. I don't even know how we got here.
And I bet it was a good pizza place.
It was amazing. He had an incredible recommendation. We took him on it, and it was fantastic.
So you've got your first movie under your belt, and there's a couple of other movies that you did. I think Teddy Bear's Picnic. Is that the?
Well, that was a vanity project that Harry Shearer, who's a comic, who was in Spinal Tap. He's Derek Small in Spinal Tap.
Yep.
Harry was making this. He's done a lot of movies with Chris Guest. He wanted to do this movie about Bohemian Grove, which is this crazy place in Northern California where a lot of these rich Republican fat cats hang out in the summer and drink and get loaded, and it's a famous place. Nixon went there, and these Kissinger would give policy speeches, and it was just this nutty, weird place. So Harry got together a bunch of his friends to make a movie, kind of a skit movie about it, and he had nobody to put it together. So I was like, Harry, I'm like a huge fan. I would love to do this, and it was sort of like a fun summer gig. So it was a bit of a throwaway in terms of it never really saw the light of day. It's out there somewhere, but Michael McKean's in it, and Fred Willard's in it, and all these heroes I had from SCTV days where I loved those guys. So it was fun, and it's a silly thing, but it was a blast working with Harry. He's a great artist, and it was super fun. So that was a fan movie for me.
Now, did you ever, set your sights on any particular genre? Like, it was dramas or comedies or anything specific that you want to do? I'm just looking at the first few movies that you did, and it seems to be a lot of different genres right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, when you're starting out, you kind of work on whatever you can work on. And then, once you start to get a little bit of a reputation, you start to feel like, people go, oh, he's the guy that did, I did a movie with Robin Williams that was a thriller. And so people, and that, it got some success to it. So people were like, oh, he did this, he does thrillers. And so now it's like, hey, do you want to do this thriller? And you're kind of like, well, if it's good, I'd love to. I mean, you wanted to keep working, but it's important to manage what you're doing. So my criteria was always, what's the script, and is the director going to be great? And if it's a good script that I know is solid, because I very often would read stuff and go, no, I'm not going to do it. And I'm not even going near it because my career's too delicate. If I do a movie that's bad, I'm never going to recover. I just got to make sure the next one out's got to be the best piece of material I can find. So when I did 1 Hour Photo, I'm like, Mark Romanek is like one of the best filmmakers like ever. The music videos he's done are high art, and he's done, he hadn't done a feature really at that point. He'd done a small independent film that he disowned, but this project at Searchlight was really exciting because he is somebody that I just sort of looked up to as someone who not only could I learn a lot from, but this would be a special project. So that felt right. And then, just going along, you just say, okay, well, what is it that's going to make this special? And if the script's not good and the casting's wrong, you got to run away because you're the one that's going to get having to deal with putting it together, and it never going to go together.
Right. And I noticed a lot of the early movies that you did leading up to sort of the beginning of the next decade, I'll refer to it as the Marvel years for you. I mean, these movies were very hinging on performance and story and structure. Do you think those 8 or 10 movies that you did influenced the way you cut the $200 million Marvel movies?
Yeah, totally. I mean, well, everything influences it. I mean, you're as you're going along, you're learning about what you like and what you respond to as a filmmaker. And if you're somebody who, like, when the script for Family Stone came along, it was like, well, this is, I understand what this is doing. And also look at that cast. It's crazy. Like, that's not a cast where you go, I'm not sure that's going to work. It's like Diane Keaton's in it. I'm in. I mean, like, when am I going to get a chance to do that? And in a part that she can knock out of the, really knock it out. And I think it's about, like, your taste. You follow your taste, and to do it, because then you're going to love going to work every day. I mean, if I worked on a movie, if I did a movie for money and I hated it, there's some films that I don't like. They're not my speed. There were movies at Marvel they're movies I would not have done. Like, not necessarily choice, but like I didn't do the Thor movies because that character didn't speak to me the way Cap did. In the same way that
were you offered those movies and
no, but I mean, there's always opportunities to, like, campaign for them at some point. I could have said, hey, can I do, can I work on Ragnarok? But, which, by the way, I loved, but the character, like, what drew me to the material, I was always much more drawn to that, to Cap's story. And,
sure.
and Evan's arc that he was working on with that character was interesting to me, in the same way that I would love to do a romantic comedy, but I wasn't interested in any of them until I saw, oh, it's Diane Keaton, and the romantic comedy, the main character is a bigot.
Right.
That's the greatest thing ever. I'm doing it, and it turned out to be a movie that I just adore, because Sarah Jessica is a complete she's a complete asshole in that movie, and she's adorable, but she's just horrible. And that was like, I can't not do that movie. That script was so good and so funny. I mean, just laugh out loud funny. And by a director who had made another movie called Big Eden, which I had seen, and incredibly delicate, beautiful human movie. And when I knew he had that level of skill with actors and he could make a tender movie, and he was making this super harsh movie that was going to have a tender side, I knew that guy was somebody that I really wanted to work with. So, and then Tom's been a good friend of mine for ever since.
When I was watching, I tried to watch a lot of the movies that you've done, and obviously a lot of the Marvel stuff I saw with my teenage sons during the last 8 years.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff I saw a few times. But going back and watching Crazy Heart or even Public Enemies, again, it's the subtleties and performance and the acting and the actors that I then would hearken back to watching Age of Ultron and thinking there's moments of drama that you can hold on characters' faces,
yep,
even in a movie that size. I mean, can you expand on that, like the differences between, say, working on, say, Crazy Heart, and then cutting a scene with an incredible amount of visual effects, but somehow trying to get the drama, the acting, the essence of a performance in there?
Sure. Well, let me talk about Crazy Heart a little bit. That was a movie that I actually helped out on, and a lot of the credit on that movie goes to John Axelrod, who was my roommate in college and is an incredible editor who ended up working with James after I got out of sync with James. John took over and has been editing most of his movies. John's an incredible talent, and he had gotten Crazy Heart to the point where it was this amazing movie that Searchlight purchased, and then John was on another project and unable to finish it when they decided it was time to release it. So I came in and worked with Scott Cooper on finishing that film, to kind of carry forward the work. And it was really fascinating working with Scott, who's an actor himself, great director, but also an actor. And he was really, I learned a lot from him about crafting performance. In that movie, we went through and really tuned it with the music and the performances to get it into a real sweet spot, because it was a case of a movie that wasn't finished yet, and the studio bought it, loved it, wanted to get it out, but they'd run out of money. They hadn't finished cutting it and mixing it and getting all those little details that you do in the last weeks that shape it and turn it into something special. That was what our task was, because it was unfinished, and the soundtrack was a disaster. The mix they had done was awful.
Oh, really? Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It was a complete mess, and the first thing I said is, we got to remix this. We're going to rip it all out and start from scratch. And
wow.
We did. And it was we did it in like 6 days, but we started from scratch. Fortunately, the music was in pretty good shape. That part of it, which is a lot of the movie, the mix on that was out of balance when we got the master, but the content, the production that T-Bone Burnett had done was excellent, and we had this great mixer, Rick Klein, who had mixed it, but it had been mixed on a stage that was in disrepair, and the monitors were out of balance, so the quality of the final mix was a disaster, and the dialogue had been done poorly. So we had to clean. We got together with, I got the sound editor Andrew DeCristofaro, who I work with a lot, and he and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to redo all the dialogue. We're going to have to do it fast though. But that's where all the performance is. That's where all the nuance in Bridges' performance is. He's got all this vocals range, and the singing sounds amazing. We got to bring it all up to that level and rebalance those performances because it's a musical.
Right. And you did it in 6 days.
The mix we did, the edit was a little longer, but we mixed it in 6-7 days, I think, and knocked it out. And but it was so fun. I mean, the music's so great. You can't help but love doing it. So that was exciting. And I learned a lot about detail work on that movie and about acting from Scott Cooper. So each movie you pick up something, you learn something, just like on Public Enemies. I was working with Paul Rubel, who's a great editor, learned so much from Paul about how he organizes his material, how he focuses. But I think with Michael, the big lesson I take away from that experience, the 15 months of hell going through, every conceivable detail, going through all that minutia, finding.
And you were one of how many editors on that movie?
I think 8 people walked through the door at one time or another. But I mean, Paul and I did the most work.
And you were the last man standing?
I was the last man standing. I actually ended up face down in a park in Burbank at the end of that one, but that's another story. But it was exhausting. I mean, Michael will take you to your limit. It's like, it's sort of like one of those things where it's like, when you finish one of those movies, you feel like the guy in like Free Solo, you get to the top and you just sort of like, you're so happy you want to cry because it's over, but you also feel like, wow, I did something. But while you're doing it, you feel like you're going to plummet to your death at any moment.
Sure.
But
I remember in the pre-interview, I asked you, would you ever work with Michael Mann again? And you said, yeah, absolutely in a second, but your wife would not let you work with him.
Oh, she's probably thinking she'd be worried I'd die. It's like an extreme sport with him. It's like, it literally is like being, one of those guys who goes in the wingsuits or something.
Sure.
Maybe.
I mean, everybody's heard the stories that he shoots an incredible amount of footage, from what I heard.
But I mean, really, what it is, what's amazing. The takeaway from working with him was very simple. It was that he's just not a guy who's interested in making an unintentional choice. He's not a guy who wants to just, nothing's random with Michael. Everything's thought out, planned out, meticulously, unbelievably carefully considered. And he considers every option. And when you consider how many frames there are in a movie, let alone what you've shot, that's a lot of options for different combinations of things. And he wants to try them all. And then he's interested in sync relationships with music. He's interested in the way, characters arc over the course of the movie and what subtle, tiny little changes. And the way he directs actors and the way he directs camera, it really is vivid. I mean, you can do a lot with what he shoots. He's the best shooter.
Does he do a lot of takes?
Not particularly, but he shoots a lot of footage.
Right.
But I wouldn't say he does a lot of takes. It's more about exploring, ideas with camera and timing. And
right.
With performances, it's not an insignificant amount, but there are directors who shoot more.
Right.
He creates situations. He's also really, he comes from documentaries. So his need for spontaneity and reality and verite is there. And you can see it in his movies, and there's incredible operating in Public Enemies, just camera work and storytelling that way. But
sure.
What I learned from him is just don't make unintentional choices. There's no reason to do that. And I understand where he's coming from. Even if you want to make an unintentional choice, then that's an intentional choice. But I think what he's saying is, as an editor, the piece of music you chose, the sync you chose to put it in, the reason it's there is not there for any random reason. If you're an editor and you put a piece of music on a scene just because you think it needs music, because it might be a little slow otherwise, you're making a huge mistake. You should never, ever put a piece of music on a scene unless that scene absolutely needs that music. If you put music on a scene that doesn't need it, why are you doing that? And
sure. So he would challenge you on that? Like if you were doing choices or making decisions, he would challenge you on that?
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Absolutely. But even to the point where he'd be like, why'd you cut on that frame and not like 1 frame earlier or 2 frames earlier? And he'd go, I think if you cut him out a frame earlier, you're going to get a different effect. And I'd be like, wow, maybe you're right. And I tried, and God damn, he's right. Like, that's what he can see. He can see every frame. So you're like, wow, this guy's on another level. And every once in a while you'll get a note you don't understand, but chase it, because that's what he's doing. We're chasing something that we don't know. It's movies are weird. They make themselves. You're just along for the ride. So,
Right.
you know, when Michael's a perfect guy to be on the car with, but it's a long ride.
But he's open to suggestions. He's open to
Oh,
ideas.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. You can fight with him. Sometimes one time he showed me 2 versions of a scene and said, which one do you like? And I picked A, and he said, then it's going to be B. And you knew it was a setup, and I'm like, okay, fine. I get how that's played. But I fought with him a lot. I fought with him on the sound a lot. I fought with him on a lot of different things, and I lost and I won, and I don't remember much of it, but you know, my kids discovered it on Netflix a couple weeks ago, and they're, hey Dad, it's on there. And I watched a couple scenes, and I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I don't remember working on it. And I don't remember,
Who cut this?
I don't remember who cut what. I remember the one scene I remember cutting in that movie is there's a scene where Dillinger is brought to the airport and it's raining, and they light these torches, and
Yeah.
I remember that. I cut that scene, and that was I spent a long time on that one. I remember every frame of that guy. But with Paul, and I think I worked with Chris Wagner, and I worked with Mike Tronick, and I worked with Steve Rosenblum, and I worked with Hank Corwin. I mean, so many people came through the doors there, and I'm like, every day I was meeting one of my heroes. I was like,
that's cool. That's very cool.
I mean, who's next? You know, and you never
The
knew.
revolving door on the cutting room.
Yeah, and some of them were like, sometimes it was like, oh boy, we're here awful late. Like, yeah.
Well, on the same sort of theme of directors, I'm just going to throw some names at you.
Okay.
And just go ahead and riff. So the first name I want to throw at you is Joss Whedon.
Joss is amazing, and but I love Joss because he's a writer. So when you work with him, it's all about the music of the dialogue. He's a dialogue rhythm, guy, and that's, you don't change the words, and you don't cut a word out. You don't cut a syllable out. You don't cut a out. You got to keep it all there because he's heard it in his head a lot, and he has that skill. He has that rhythm in his brain. So cutting dialogue with him is really fun, and it's really fun dialogue for actors to say and to cut for the most part. And he has a great imagination, great sense of humor, and those movies were incredibly challenging. But he's incredibly quick-witted, and I had a great time working with him. I really enjoyed working with him.
The Russo brothers.
Well, this is tough because I love those guys like their family. I mean, these two people, I remember when I met their parents, I thanked them for raising them so well, because they are just two of the great people that if you can meet people and work with people like that in this industry, you're lucky.
I was watching, I watched this with my kids. I was watching a live feed of the red carpet for one of the movies. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one. They directed it, and you wandered around in the background, and one of them spotted you and dragged you up to this interview. And you were great, right? But it's just like, my sons were like, who's that guy? I'm like, that's the editor. They're pushing him right into the spotlight, going, this is the wonder editor. This is the guy that makes the movie.
I know, they're great. I mean, they're incredible people. They are honorable. They're honest. They are dedicated. I mean, I sound like an idiot when I talk about them because it just sounds like it's some sort of publicity bullshit, but it's not. I mean, just anybody listening to this thing, if you ever get a chance to work with those guys, take it immediately, because they just, by the way, they just made a movie that's coming out. I don't know when. They made a movie called Cherry with Tom Holland, which I have had the privilege of peeking at, and it's mind-blowingly great. And yeah, it's really good. And they are.
How do those guys work? Like, in the sense of directing simultaneously, they both come to the cutting room. Are they interchangeable? Do they finish each other's sentences? Like, what's your relationship with dueling directors as opposed to one director?
They're really good. They're seamless. They don't hand off as much. They like to work together, and they like to fight about it, talk about it, debate it, throw ideas around. making a film with a crew is always having a conversation, and they bring everybody into it at the right times. It's really useful, but they have a conversation themselves. And so very often you walk onto set, they're behind the monitor. We're probably rolling. The actors are probably in the take, and we're talking about the next idea to give those actors. I remember we were shooting a scene for Endgame, and Don Cheadle had to list all these time travel movies, and he had to riff, like he had to run through all of them, like time after time, somewhere in time, blah, blah. And Joe was just throwing time travel movie ideas to Cheadle off, while we were rolling, and like interrupting the take. And then Don would take it and like fold it in, and that's how they like to work. The camera's rolling, but we're still having ideas. Let's work it. And there's a casualness and an ability to have a conversation about what we're doing and how to improve it at any given time that they're willing to have, which is so exciting because you never feel stressed on their sets. It's so relaxed, which allows the actors to relax. And it's why they are able to get such beautiful performances in ridiculous situations. I mean, these Avengers movies are so absurd. You're fighting aliens, or there's a giant, whatever it is, like some kind of like flying space lizard. But there's a humanity that they get out of even the reactions to those things that is, Joss knows this too. It's like he's able to understand when to let the crazy be crazy and when to be human, relatable.
Well, when you're dealing with that many stars in a movie, and sometimes in the same scene, that just must be one of the most intimidating things ever.
It might be, but you love them so much when you're on their crew as an actor or as an editor or as a cinematographer that you just will follow them anywhere because you trust them. And so with the actors, I remember as we started on Infinity War, I'm like, Joe, how are you going to handle all these people? Because it's going to be nuts at some point. And he's like, I don't know. But I watched this thing that he did, like blew my mind because it was so brilliant. He just approached it like we were a football team, and he would just call them out by name, but last name, right? So it'd be Rudd, get over here. Evans, Downey, over here. It'd be like, everybody's last name. And that way because we had 14 Chris's anyway, so that was a problem. So it was going to be, Evans, Pratt, over here. And you'd just get everybody, call them out like they're a sports team. It took all the formality out of it, and it also made everybody understand the context. We are literally trying to just get through the first quarter. Because some of these scenes are the blocking so bananas. You can see some of the behind the scenes footage where you have all these actors, and it's like, where do you put everybody and how do you shoot it?
Who do you start with first? Who gets the first close up? Who gets the last close up? Yeah.
Sometimes we didn't have the scene, we hadn't like really, the scene wasn't working. You have all this blocking to figure out. The actors help you with that, but you need directors who are able to really listen.
Sure. Were you ever in a position? Well, I'm sure you were, but like, were there ever times where they had to do reshoots, or you cut a scene together and it just didn't seem to work, or there was something missing to it, and you would call them up or send them an email and say, "Hey, look, I got to talk to you about something." And that scenario ever happen?
Yeah, constantly.
And if it did, can you tell us a story or two?
Well, let me think. The funny, when you say that though, it sounds like it just sort of, the way we made those movies was so fluid. We had, we were shooting 2 movies at the same time. We were shooting like constantly and we had the cast rotating in and out over different times. And the movies were being written and rewritten as we were shooting them, not because the scripts were bad, but because we were discovering things and learning things about the way what was playing and what was not, and what was interesting. And it was difficult because we didn't have it was important for us to finish Infinity War and understand that movie before we really figured out how to finish Endgame.
Right.
And because we were shooting, certain things had to be shot because of a schedule and so forth. It meant that we were sometimes shooting some things that we were really not clear on how they were going to land, because we didn't know, you're doing 2 movies at once, they're interactive.
And were some stuff just not written because they just didn't want the outcome to be leaked?
No. The movie was written. Both movies were completely written when we started shooting.
Oh, okay.
Completely, and they were being worked. Joe and Anthony, for the most part, they really work on the movies as they're going. I mean, I think Civil War is probably the most stable. That script was incredibly tight, and we shot it pretty much as written with a few changes, but that was less involved. with the changes. But with Infinity War and Endgame, it was a constant process of updating and changing. By the way, this is what a lot of the Marvel movies are like, and it's because, Kevin has set a tone there where it's like, good ideas should not be, we can't just say, it's too late. We had a great idea, but it's too bad. We already shot that scene last week. It's like, no, that's too good. We're shooting it again tomorrow.
We're shooting it again.
Why wouldn't you, if you have an idea, right? That's like, oh, wait a minute, hang on. This would be fantastic. We have to do this.
Right.
It's that sort of thing. You kind of go, oh,
So
well.
you do a lot of that riffing with the directors and Kevin. You're talking about Kevin Feige?
Kevin Feige. Yeah, Kevin
Yeah.
Feige. Yeah, no, we all do. I mean, Marcus and McFeely, the screenwriters, Kevin, Lou.
And for those who don't know, Kevin is the head of Marvel. Correct?
Marvel, yep, and has been since. I mean, I met him on Captain America: First Avenger. He walked in, I didn't know who he was. I'm like, who's that guy? And some kid. Well, funny story though. I'll tell this story, which I love to tell, which is, so it's a great story for people. Like it's one of those stories that like reminds you about like how the business works. So in 1995, I was working on a movie called Assassins, which is a Sylvester Stallone, Julianne Moore internet thriller. It might be the first.
Richard Donner directed it, I think, didn't he?
Donner.
Yeah.
And Richie Marx was cutting it. I was working. We were at Warner Brothers, and Richie was cutting in Donner's offices on the Warner lot. We had shot in Seattle. And we were back in, and I was working in another building. I was in charge of the film team because we were conforming film constantly for previews on that show. It was still a film show cut on the Avid, but finished on film. And it was this cheesy Sylvester Stallone thing. But we had a blast because it was summer. We were in Burbank, and we were
Wasn't it written by the Wachowski brothers?
Written by the Wachowski brothers, rewritten by Brian Helgeland.
Oh, right.
And it was their draft was quite different. It was Antonio Banderas as the young assassin, Sylvester Stallone as the old guy, Julianne Moore as this internet thief, and it's super fun because it's a Dick Donner movie, but it's also super cheesy. Anyway, there was this guy who answered the phones at Donner's office, who I knew in passing, but didn't really give a second thought to. He was a PA. Hi, the Donner Schuler Donner Productions. That guy, right? That was Kevin.
Oh.
So I'm an assistant editor. He's getting the phones. Cut to years later, he's running the universe, and thank God he hired me, so I had a job. But total sweetheart, great guy. I mean, like another one of those people. Like you just if you can work for him. He's a great man, and he's generous, and he's unbelievably.
So talk a little bit about your relationship with him. I mean, obviously you must have a rapport for having done 9 or 8 Marvel movies with 1, 2, 3, 4 different directors.
Yeah. Well,
so you're the constant in the last $10 billion for these movies.
Well, there's a lot of constants. That's the thing. I mean, I'd love to say, oh yeah, but Kevin is. I loved working for him on those movies. I mean, he's a very generous producer, and by that I mean he's someone who listens and is open to ideas, respects the craft of editing, is also very good at it, understands how to be in an editing room, understands how to give a note, understands sound, really understands film scoring and music on a deep, deep level.
Wow.
His understanding of those techniques is unlike most producers you will meet. Not that there aren't great producers who understand those things, but this guy's he's got a skill set about filmmaking that is way beyond, most people. So he's a great guy to learn from, but also he's got the chops. So
he also sounds like he doesn't have a lot of. He's not full of pretense. He doesn't come in and say, "This is how we're going to do it." He listens to what you have to contribute and what your ideas are.
Yeah, I mean, he's fond of saying, that we do this so we got to make a great film so we can make another one. I mean, he just loves doing it, like we all do. It's sort of like what are we going to do? Don't put us on the streets because this is what we love to do and we don't know how to do anything else. But he's the thing about Marvel is he created a world where there's a lot of people that can feel like they are contributing, and I felt that way. I felt, oh my God, I have ownership over this. Cap is my guy. I got to make sure that arc works. I love Chris Evans. I want this to be my movie. This is my movie. This is my character. This is my franchise. But then it's Avengers. I feel the same way. And then Kevin makes you feel that way about the characters, and there's a lot of people here who do that. James Gunn feels like he the Guardians characters are his, but he didn't do that by himself. The Russos didn't do it by themselves. There was incredible visual effects, supervisor Dan DeLue, who invented so much of Infinity War and Endgame, he feels like that's his movie.
Right.
We all feel like it's our movie. We all feel like we're the authors of these movies. The same kind of pride you'd feel if you were the director, or perhaps what Kevin feels. I mean, it's just that you don't feel like, for whatever people say, there's so many individual talents that contribute to making these things.
Sure.
And that's why they're sort of unique and special.
Sure.
It's also why, people criticize them for feeling like not totally personal expressions, but
the thing is, and I'm just going to gush for 2 seconds here. It's just like, I love the art house movies and the small movies and the performance movies. But when I go with my kids and they're, 14 and 16, and we sit in the movie theater, it's so entertaining, but there's still there's a smartness to it. There's an entertainment value that's big and explosive, but there's heart to it. There's a lot of heart to it. And I'm just being a fanboy there. Now I've got 3 more questions myself.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then I'm going to go to the Q&A people, because
please,
we're almost at 8:00. So I feel like
okay.
I've just been having a conversation with you.
Having a good time.
So 3 questions I have, which actually goes part and parcel to what we were just talking about there. Is there one thing in any of the movies, any movies really, Marvel movies or anything, that you want to lay claim to? You want to stake and say, this was my idea and I want the world to know? What is one thing that you would say?
Oh my God.
One thing that you can say, that was my idea. And, I want you to be as proud as you possibly can.
Well, I can't possibly answer that question, because when you do something like this with so many people, I got to tell you, and this is going to sound like bullshit, but I can't remember whose idea was what anymore. I can't. I mean, the one thing, I guess, well, I'll give you 2. One, I am really, 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 really happy that and this was a decision we all made, but I was pushing for it, but I'm really happy we reshot, Natasha's death in Endgame when she goes over the cliff. And we did it because it was an action scene, but we turned it into an intimate sort of moment between her and Renner, where they had to sort of fight each other for who was going to make the sacrifice. And it was and Marcus and McFeely, had written this, like, I remember I was pushing for a change to that scene for months and months and months. Joe and Anthony seemed to feel the same way. We got into a room one time with Marcus and McFeely, and they just started writing what that might be. And it just bloomed. It was, I was like, I think it should be this. It should be her. She should.
Is this during production, or would you guys do this regularly?
No, it's late. It was late. We had already shot most of it. It was during late reshoots. And I'm like, it's not working. It's got to be this moment with her and Renner. And they just started writing the scene. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I just was watching these 2 screenwriters write this great scene before my eyes. And then, like, 2 weeks later, we were on a set shooting it with Renner and Scarlett, and it was like the most beautiful thing ever. And it's one of my favorite things in the movie. It's just, it's Hawkeye and Widow, and they were, bonded together in the first film. And
sure. No, it's an awesome scene. It's really.
Anyway, I was
really
so happy. I'm so happy. That's one of those ones where I was like, we got to do it. And then, of course, everybody figured out how to, and we did it. So that I'm pretty proud of. And the other thing is, there's a long errand, but if you're watching Age of Ultron, there's a scene where I can't even remember the dialogue now, but there's Iron Man flies in, and there's all these Hydra guys, and they're in this lab, and he goes, okay guys, we should talk. And then they open fire on him, and then he opens his suit and he kneecaps all of them and smashes them all up and basically shoots them so they fall to the ground. And then he says, oh, that was a good talk. And then one of them in the background goes, no, it wasn't. And that was me saying, no, it wasn't.
Oh, now I'm going to go watch that scene.
You can see me in there, and it gets a huge laugh. It's the corniest, crappiest thing ever. It's a total, what you call low ball thing, but everybody laughs. And I'm like, when you get a laugh from some dumb line like that, it's pretty great. So I guess I'm not saying I'm proud of that, but I am, but it is one of my favorite, it's a favorite moment because I got to actually
sure.
be in a scene.
My second last question is, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, the scope of the movies for Marvel, but also just in general, your relationship with assistants and how you cultivate them, what
I'm
you,
going by right now.
yeah, I see one walking by. There's an
Hey, Robin.
assistant right there.
Hi, Robin. Um,
But I mean, can you just, I mean, I'm a huge fan of assistants, and to the point where like they all become my friends, and I just want to hear what your work method is with assistant editors.
well, they're basically my family. I think of them as family. Like, you know, we spend so much time together, and we know so much about each other, and we have to support each other in so many ways that if you don't have a good, you know, relationship, your life is ruined because you're just around each other so much. So I like my assistants to want to be editors. I really want them all to want to replace me. I want them to want my job, and I want them to cut. You know, I don't want them to just be, oh, I'll be fine just being an assistant. I want them to really, you know, want to have ambition and want to work their way up. So it's important. That's important to me. But we also spend a lot of time, you know, we're the group that we ended up that evolved over the course of the Avengers movies was a really good group of people that are that, you know, we became very close. And one of the things we would like, you do these things, they're sort of bonding exercises or whatever, but like, you know, during the mixes we would all get the sound team together, who we also were good friends with, and the picture department, we go bowling and like have a, you know, and have a bowling contest. Did we have time to do that? No, we probably didn't, but it was so important to get, you know, just to have a moment where you all kind of like hung out, because there is, you know, those personal relationships, that's you're depending on each other, you're backing each other up, and that it's like being part of a you know, not to sound too corny, but it's like some sort of elite
It's a team. Yeah. That's I couldn't agree more. It's like you're storming the beach, and you need a tight team.
Yeah, and with Marvel, everything's so confidential. Everything's so, you know, you're working. It's like working at the CIA. You can't talk about it, and so you can.
Does that ever drive you crazy? Are you like reading scripts or cutting scenes, going, "Oh my God, it's a year before anyone's ever going to be talking about this"? Does that ever drive you nuts?
No, I mean, I don't. I'd rather wait for the movie to come out myself. But it is tough when people are like, you know, there's so much attention to it. You know, like what's going to happen? And you're like, well, I can't tell you, and you know, you just can't talk about it because you slip, and we don't want that. But you can talk about it with the assistants, and we can talk. That's the other thing, is they become your confidants about the movie too. They'll tell you when it sucks.
Right.
They're the only ones that have seen it until we show it to a preview audience. So their opinions are really important.
That's cool. That's a great answer. My last question, and then we'll go to the Q&A. And it's sort of a big question, but I mean, how do you deal with, and what's your approach to visual effects? I mean, the last 8 movies that you've done have had quite a bit of visual effects. But I mean, the show that you just did in Toronto, I don't know if there's a lot of visual effects or not. But
there's some. Yeah, I mean, these days there's some in everything, because they're used so much to make production possible. You know, window comps or you know, removals of things.
But when you're working on a movie that has 2,500 visual effects shots, how do you wrap your head around that?
Well, I mean, I didn't know anything about it till I started working at Marvel. I learned a lot from the system there, and the system that we worked on at Marvel evolved dramatically over the time that I was here. So, and what it is when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. I didn't know this was the way it was done, and it's always sort of an eye opener to me. But there's computer programs that allow you to do, you know, pre-visualization, animatics, moving storyboards, and they're very sophisticated. So for complex visual effect shots, you know, the computer can create the environment or the animation or the character even, and in rough form, you can sketch it out. It's like anything. You start with a sketch, storyboards, any, you know, rudimentary visual information. And
so it's almost like you're helping make an animated movie at a certain point.
Totally that. It's exactly what it is. And you start with sketches. You know, in animation, it would be, you know, pencil tests. And then that would evolve into, you know, cell tests. And then it would become, but with computers, you can evolve that process quickly and efficiently, but it also allows you a massive amount of options, which means you've got to be really focused on the storytelling when you build these things. So for me, the big part of making these movies is consulting with the animators who are doing those pre-visualization animatics, because that's our story and those are our shots. And they'll make me coverage. They'll make me different options. They'll
So you
it's
can order up basically almost anything, and
yeah.
they'll draw it up and put it in the movie.
And sometimes
Wow.
it's like sometimes you get it the next day. It's amazing. Like it's like you ask for a house, a building. They either ask for a room, they give you a house the next day. And the visual effects supervisor Dan DeLue and Joe and Anthony Russo and whoever's working on the movies, everybody's contributing to that information flow. And then there's like people like Ryan Meinerding at Marvel who are visual concept artists who are coming up with creatures, and there's a huge group of visual designers at Marvel that are building all these incredible environments and creatures and colors. So that's, I mean, we're just inheriting all that. But as an editor, I say, okay, well, cool. We need a big lizard guy here. We need this here. But what we really need is I need to know that, so-and-so's got the gauntlet and they're being chased by this thing. So I'm doing storytelling. They're doing all the, other stuff that gives it the visual, punch.
Yeah.
But we all have to work together and in the service of telling the story.
My God, it sounds like a giant sandbox, and you guys are just having a ball.
It's
That's
fun.
the way you're depicting it.
It's a sandbox, but remember, there's a release date looming, so you got to play fast.
Sure, yeah. It's about to rain any minute now.
Exactly.
All right, Jeffrey. So now we're going to jump to the Q&A, and I'm just going to zip through some of these and just read them. So welcome to live broadcast.
Okay.
Philip Fowler is asking, what is your typical demeanor in the edit room with directors and producers? What kind of social environment do you like to create and work in? Well, you kind of touched upon that with the assistants, but tell us about your demeanor.
Well, it depends on the director. I mean, some of them are not interested in hanging out. Some of them are. It's on a Russo brothers movie. It's not unusual that there's a pub crawl. So that will happen. You're like family with them. So it definitely is a much more relaxed environment.
Do you find yourself having to go to set more on
I'm on set every day.
Every day, really?
On everything.
Wow.
Pretty much.
And is that by choice, or are they requiring you to be there?
I don't know. I mean, somewhere I was told I wasn't supposed to do that, but I don't know how to do it any other way. It's like somebody says, don't do that. I'm like, yeah, but how do I do this? Because I got to go talk to my directors and they're busy and they're shooting all day and I don't want to stay up all night. And they're not going to come to the editing room at 10 o'clock after they're done shooting. I got to go talk to them and they're right over there. I'm going to go do it. I mean, I also with, on the Comey Rule, which we shot in Toronto and actually in Mississauga out by the airport, at a studio out there at CBS Studios, we
careful, I live in Etobicoke.
Listen, absolutely lovely, except where we were, which is a little bit of we were out like we were sort of in the container yard section of Mississauga, and there was food was a long way away. There was a Tim Hortons really close, which I leaned on heavily. But
basically, you're saying it wasn't the Warner Brothers lot.
Well, it was. The thing is, it was fine for what it was, but it was definitely like an industrial park area, and the stages themselves were this old macaroni and cheese factory, I guess, but they had converted them into sound stages. So it's building, but there's no roof. So like this, like it's a very odd place. But we did build the Oval Office in there. It was pretty cool, and even on that show, I was there, on set, a lot because we had to make that thing really fast. And so when you're doing something really quick, I mean, it was it's 4 hours of content. We started shooting it in November and we delivered it yesterday. So it's basically, it's pretty fast, and a lot of cast members, very dense. Director needs to get information back and forth quickly. I just don't know any other way to do it except to be there. I don't like to. One
of my favorite actors, I think, is in that, Peter Coyote.
He is actually. He plays Robert Mueller.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
He's unbelievable.
Yeah, really, I did a series in Vancouver that he was part of, and
he's fantastic.
I inadvertently somehow ended up in a car with him from the airport to set, and I was just like, "Your keys from ET," and he's like, "Wow, that was a long time ago." Anyways, I'm getting all the story, but
you're gonna love him as well. Well, it is my process. I do not know if it's probably not the same with every director. So I would say with Billy, who's a good friend of mine, I wanted to hang around him and help him when I could. With the Russos, you just are always there because you're always having a conversation. They call you down or you go down. I'd check in with them in the morning. We'd go to, I'd spend, some time with them in the morning. We'd block with the actors. I get a sense of what the scene was going to be like, talk to the actors about what they were concerned about. Like you get a little bit of a sense of things. they ask you how it's going. You know, what have you cut today? What does it look like? How do I look? Am I okay? Does it feel right? And
How do I look? Always cut to me.
It's never that. It's more like they're always worried about how their performance is tracking, you know, because they're really craftsmen, you know, it, you know, they're like, they will ask you stuff and you have to answer. And they're like, hey, I did a take. Did you see the take where where I did the thing where I, with my eyes, I'm like, yeah, it was fantastic. It's in. You got it, right? The one, number 3. I'm like, yeah, I got it. It's in. It's amazing. They know.
Oh, they're that specific. They can get that specific.
Yeah. Downey will. Sure. Downey knows what he did.
Really?
Oh,
wow.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I have an anonymous attendee who says, what is the work environment like when you edit work-life balance? So it's basically a work-life balance. Like instead of the example that you gave, maybe working for Michael Mann, but like, what is your work-life balance and what are your least favorite parts of the lifestyle that you live?
Well, definitely the least favorite part is the hours, because it's hard you just never have enough hours in the day to get everything done. And it's really tough. And as a parent, my approach is different than, I mean, I started this before I had kids, but with kids, everything changes. And I tend to work, I either shift my work hours to really early, so I get to spend time with them in the evening, or in the summer when they're home, I come into work later and work late. So I try to like adjust it so I have some time with them, but yet I have, enough of a work day that I can get things done. Because I don't work very, I wouldn't say that I'm fast, but I'm not slow. But one of the things is I have about 3 or 4 hours of flow per day that I can get into to cut, and that's it. And when that's gone, I can do technical, logistical stuff, but the editing part only really lives for a short amount of time during a day. So I want to use that well. And and that's sort of, I try to calibrate to that. And
is that a moving target, or do you know the afternoon between 1 and 4 or whatever?
Well,
or
mornings are better for me. I mean, I do more work in the morning. Usually if I can start early, I get more done. And then the afternoons are fine for phone calls and all. I mean, all movies require thousands and thousands of phone calls and emails and all this, and complaining and not complaining. And it's nuts. I mean, how much you have to do to go, hey, did you remember that thing? And did we do that? And there's a lot of that follow-up stuff that has to go on. The assistants do some of it, but you got to do it. You got to communicate. You got to talk to your sound editors. You got to talk to your visual effects people. It's endless, the people you have to communicate with. And it's part of the fun part of the job, because that's where you have ideas. Like when you have those conversations, you go, oh, wait, I got an idea. We have a problem. I know how to solve it. And then you do it. But when you're editing, I'm not doing that. I'm listening to the actor, and I'm listening to what they're saying and what they sound like and what they're doing with their eyes. I'm looking for that stuff. I don't want to be thinking about like the schedule. So for me, work-life balance is spend as much time with the kids as you possibly can. Never do 7-day weeks if you can help it. I've had to, but I hate that. 6 is bad. 7's impossible. Right. You're usually no good for me, I'm after 11 o'clock at night. If I've been here since 6 a.m., I'm useless. What am I doing? So make sure the good work gets done in the morning. And then, you have to have time to recharge with your family. It's absolutely essential.
That's good. That's great advice.
And by the way, working out, and I meditate, although I need to be more regular about it, but I do, transcendental meditation, which is just a way to just stop for a second.
Sure.
You can get ideas back in, because there's so much noise these days. I do that just to give myself a little bit of a pause, twice a day. And then, you got to get your sleep. I mean, it's crazy. It's a physical and a mental stress.
Which I don't think a lot of people realize. I think a lot of interpretation is, oh, you're just sitting in a chair in a dark little room. So, I mean, how much stress, how much, like what sort of, why are you so tired when you go home?
Well, I mean, sometimes you are in a chair, but like, on days when we were shooting Infinity War, it's like, I'd call time 6:30, and that means you're on set at 6:30 for an hour. And then, there's usually cutting and then dailies. And then at lunch, you got a meeting, you're back on set. Maybe you're running a mocap unit. Maybe you're going to second unit during that day. You're walking, you're walking the set. Maybe you're going to location scout that night. I mean, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's fun. Yeah. It's super fun. But by the end of the day, you just keel over.
Yeah. You get home and your kids jump on you. Play with me. Matthew Wanis says, "Hi Jeff, I'm a huge fan of your Marvel movies and my kids too. I don't know if he's a fan of his kids or a fan of the Marvel movies. Anyways, when you are co-editing, can you explain how the work is divided between you and the other editor? Also, what is it about editing besides the power? And he has a little winky face that you love, but you kind of touched upon that. But tell us about the co-editing experience and how that divvies up and how do you approach that?
Well, it's different from every movie. I mean, with Michael Mann, for instance, he will assign things to you, and you'll just do what he tells you to cut. He'll decide who he wants to cut what, and he'll manage that completely. With Matt Schmidt and I, when we work together, we've developed a system that's really fluid. Basically, I take, like Monday, and I start working on that material. He works on Tuesday, like whatever's flowing in terms of dailies, we just trade off assembling it, putting it together. And I try to watch all the dailies, and he tries to watch all the dailies. And then we start trading stuff back and forth. He'll cut some stuff, and then I'll cut some stuff. Like he cut the scene in Infinity War where, when they first find Thor, the Guardians lay him out on the table, and he says, "It look, he's the it looks like a pirate had a baby with an angel," like that whole scene where they think, and Drax is looking at him. So Matt cut that scene, and it was so funny, and it was like amazing. And I remember like I took a pass at it, and it wasn't as good, and then he took a pass at changing it, and it wasn't as good, and he just couldn't ever really beat that cut. Like it was like, nah, he hit it, he hit it on
right.
And you're just like, well, we'll try to make it better. Let's make that funnier. And then it died. And it just was something about it that he followed his nose on it. And so every once in a while you get a scene like that. Every once in a while you get a scene that's just never going to work, and you're just working. But we trade them back and forth. And then ultimately it all ends up flowing through, I take the reels and I basically do a pass where I unify stuff, not so much editorially, but sound and mixing, and I mix the reels and I kind of unify them into reels, make sure the transitions are all in the same rhythm.
What about restructuring? Like, do you handle, like, when you get to the point where you're restructuring, if a scene needs to be moved around or you need more intercutting between? Because I notice in some of those movies, the intercutting it just must be a giant Rubik's cube to try and figure out how you keep the timing and where people are at a certain spot, and they're here and then they're there, and then like that just must change constantly. No,
it does. I mean, well, we're pretty careful with the Avengers movies. We were very careful to map out how that was going to usually play, and then we ended up changing it. But it was really carefully thought out initially. It wasn't random, but then you realize, oh, this would work better if these were cross cut earlier. And in Infinity War, we had a particular, and a lot of times what happens is that the directors or Kevin will say, well, you should intercut those two things. And you'll be like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll see you in 2 days because it's going to take me that long to do it. But I think it's a great idea, but I need time because I got to redo all the music, and we've already done all these transitions, and I've got to unwind this whole thing. And there was one scene in Infinity War. We used to have Thor would go to Nidavellir to get the axe from Eitri. He got the Stormbreaker.
Oh yeah.
And then he arrives in Wakanda. And in earlier drafts of the movie, the axe adventure happened before he arrived in Wakanda, like a long ways before. We actually kind of finished the axe adventure, and then we started the whole Battle of Wakanda, and then Thor and Rocket and Groot show up with to save the day. And we realized, oh my God, well, these guys are on a parallel course. The minute he leaves Nidavellir, he's going to land in Wakanda. And so I think it was Kevin or Joe suggested let's jam those together, and so it took me about 4 days to do. And so that'll be something where like one of us will take that on and do it. And then, it's like task-oriented, project-based co-editing. That's kind of how we do it. I don't like to split up real.
It's like a short order cook. It sounds
exactly. We need a sandwich. So,
it's like serving number 21. You're up.
Exactly. That's an idea you work on it, but I don't like splitting stuff up. Like you get reel 1, I get reel 2. I hate that. It doesn't.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. That's very interesting. You touched upon it during that answer, just sort of about changing the music and stuff like that. Can you tell us about your relationship with the composers and how you deal with either temp music, or do you get score? How I mean, there's almost, I would think, a gigantic catalog of music to pull from as far as the Marvel sound music is. But I mean, what's your relationship with the composers?
Well, it's been another like embarrassment of riches for working at Marvel. The people I got to work with, the heroes of mine, people I just look up to in terms of like, and also good friends. So we benefited greatly on almost all of the films that I worked on at Marvel because we had this incredible music editor, this guy named Steve Durkee, who was the mastermind behind temping our movies, and he really could keep the thematic threads, going, and he understood all the scores, and he's really brilliant musician in his own right, but also a great music editor. I met him on Public Enemies, actually. We worked together on that film, but he ended up handling a lot of the temping on these movies. And one of the reasons they were possible was because he was so good. And we ended up really collaborating closely on a lot of it in terms of storytelling and problem solving. And I think, he was a big part of the success of everything. And that allowed us to show the composers what we needed from a design standpoint, just for storytelling and pace and all that. And when you're dealing with people like Alan Silvestri, I mean, he's just a genius. I mean, he knows how to make a film score better than, anybody besides maybe John Williams. So you really defer to what he wants to do, but he listens to what you've got, and he listens to what Durkee has done temped and to what I've.
So there's no pretense. Again, there's no sort of, he's not offended by any of the music that's in there. So that's great.
If you respect him and he respects you, you're good. And like Michael Giacchino, who did, I worked with him briefly. I helped out a little bit on Doctor Strange and got to work with him on that a little bit. He's a good friend of mine. I've done a bunch of movies with him. So I just did a movie, like Tom Bazooka's movie, A Family Stone, Michael did, and he did Monte Carlo. So Tom and Michael and I have done now 3 movies together as editor, director, and composer. So Michael's somebody I knew before, he won an Oscar and became this, like, the next John Williams. He's an incredibly talented composer, but I've known him for a long time. And so, working with somebody like that, it feels like, it just feels like that's why I say, like, the difference between Family Stone and Doctor Strange is not that different. I've got Michael Giacchino and I've got Rachel McAdams, both in both movies.
Oh,
wow. They start to blur together at a certain point. But again, it's like these composers are people that, I'm in awe of their talent. I have to have a good relationship and a good dialogue with them. For instance, Henry Jackman, who did Captain America, Winter Soldier, and Civil War, he just did Comey Rule for us and did an amazing score. It's unlike anything he did for the superhero movies. Beautiful, beautiful score. And he did it during the pandemic.
A lot of the composers I've had conversations with, I just find that they're constantly looking to change their lane. They want to change lanes into something else, to just go completely in a different direction.
Well, it's important, I think, to talk to them before, you go too far. Like, in other words, very often we've had conversations with the composers before we start temping. In other words, if Henry Jackman's going to do your score, that approach, you change the way you temp it. You don't temp the same way for Henry Jackman that you do for Michael.
Oh, interesting.
I wouldn't. It's a different palette. It's a different sound, different tone. So
you would actually set up a meeting? You would have a meeting and meet the composer prior to temping the movie? Interesting.
Oh, very much so. Yes, very often. Very often you talk to them about it. Yeah, it's very good to do if you can. Not always can you do it. You don't always have the composer on. You don't know who you're going to have.
Right.
I don't think we had Silvestri on Cap First Avenger when we started temping that, but the movie, was a good fit for him. And casting a composer is the same as casting a lead actor. You get the right one or you're done. It'll kill your movie.
Let's go to the questions again. Do you have any influences? And again, an anonymous attendee is asking, do you have any influences that impact your style and how you would recommend building your editing portfolio?
Well, my influences, certainly Richie Marks, who I worked for and was one of my heroes. I mean, Richie was the supervising film editor on Apocalypse Now, and he held it all together. A lot of other great editors worked on that movie, but he kind of kept it from falling apart. He worked on The Godfather Part 2. He worked on Terms of Endearment. I mean, this guy has been present at the creation of some of the greatest movies ever. So I learned a ton from him about working with directors, but also about, how to cut. I wish I paid more attention, quite frankly, but he was a great influence for me. And I really, I feel like I follow a little bit of his stylistic approach to cutting, especially with rhythm and dialogue and the way he did that. Walter Murch is a huge influence on my work as well. I had the benefit of having a class with him at USC.
Oh,
and
wow.
learned a lot from him. And he was his ideas about film editing, I think, are you know amazing, and everybody should read his work. It's unlike anything nobody thinks as deeply as Walter, and so I think he's a huge influence on me. The
Right.
Conversation is one of my favorite movies.
One of mine too. Top 5 at least.
Richard Chew and Walter cut that. So I think, like, at the Coppola, Hirsch. I mean, all the Coppola late '70s Coppola, Lucas, Northern California guys. That's
Yeah.
that's my bag, man. I was born in Marin County in 1968, so I don't know if I was just catching the vibe, but even mixes. I mean, I love the Northern California sound. I still feel like the guys at Skywalker mix the best in the world. I love Tom Johnson's. My dialogue mixer has been for years, and I've worked with Laura Hirschberg, who's an incredible dialogue mixer. These are people up at, and Juan Peralta. These are people up at Skywalker Ranch. They're based up there. They're the heirs to that Northern California sound, that movies, the Lucasfilm sound. Nothing sounds better than those movies, like Raiders.
Yeah.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
You all just
the rich and detailed and
amazing. So and visual effects ILM, Joe Johnston, who I got to work with on First Avenger, one of the guy, president the creation of ILM, the guy who drew drew the X-Wing, I mean, he is the guy who drew every goddamn thing in Star Wars. So those are the guys that were Marsha Lucas got a incredible influence, Taxi Driver, Star Wars, all that stuff. I mean, she's unbelievable editor from that period. But again, all part of that weird Northern California.
Yeah. Well, we had Paul Hirsch on a couple of weeks ago in this exact same thing, and just being in that time and being in that era, and I mean, Paul bounced back and forth with De Palma and
he did,
Herbert
but again,
Ross, and
but that's all kind of. Richie did a movie for Herbert Ross. I mean, they're all kind of in that orbit. Phil Kaufman, The Right Stuff's one of my favorite movies. I mean, that's Tom Rolfe, incredible editor. I mean, a lot of people. I'm total. I mean, there's so many.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet Walter Murch some years ago. They were presenting at TIFF here in Toronto, a brand new print of Apocalypse Now, and
so cool.
I was one of the co-founders. I am one of the co-founders of the Canadian Film Editors, and they said, "Will you come on and introduce Walter?" The most nervous I've ever been.
Oh my
and
God!
I introduce him. He comes on. He does a little speech, and then the movie starts, and he goes, "I'm going for dinner. Would you like to join us?" It's like my wife is in the audience already watching the movie, and I had to say, "We're gonna go have dinner with Walter now." So, sitting with him was a complete treat.
He's great. He's a great guy.
Yeah, no, and I he's like an encyclopedia of just sort of not only just film knowledge, but just anything. Like he's like Yoda. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Anonymous attendee keeps asking questions here. Is there a specific scene in any of your movies that you've still bummed it hasn't made it to the screen? I guess in the sense, is there something that was cut that you were unhappy that wasn't in a movie?
Okay. Boy, that is
that you're allowed to talk about.
There's one that I am not allowed to talk about, which I will not talk about, but that is totally that. It's the first one that comes to mind, but I can't talk about it. This is a tough one because I don't know how other editors feel, but I really stand by the final versions that we've released on the movies I've done as the versions. Like, I don't feel. Certainly the Marvel stuff, there is very little that we've cut out of those movies, and we've cut a lot out of them. I'm not kidding. I mean, there's a mile of stuff for every movie. I don't feel like we should have included any of it. It was always the right call to take it out.
Okay. Anonymous attendee. How do you track story and how do you map it out? Do you map it out the film or on cards? Sorry, let me ask that again because I'm trying to read this.
I get it.
How do you track story? Do you map out the film on cards?
Yes. Well, Walter's technique, which has been adopted by a lot of us over the years, is actually to do cards that, visual images with a little scene description. You put them on
little pictures. Yeah.
And I do that on the Marvel films, not so much to follow the story, but more to determine where, like, to help prioritize delivery of visual effects, like sequences for visual effects. Like I tend to look at the movie, like when you look at it on a wall, you kind of can get a sense of where the work is, both for photography and visual effects, because as things get complete, so it's more of a tool for metering production. For post, the Avid is so fast now that I can restructure a movie in like 10 minutes and just take a look at like whether or not that makes sense by just pulling through it. So, and just the techniques that you use with an Avid, they're so easy now. So I tend to not lean on it that much, but I'm a big proponent of a screenplay, in writing, adhered to carefully. I don't like to just, cut a movie together without having pages. So I like pages. I ask for them. If they haven't been written because the actors have done something else, I ask that they be, put together so I have a written record to read it as well, because that's the storytelling, and I always want to guide it that way. And then we do continuities and outlines, but I prefer lists of scenes than, detailed continuities. Sometimes there's too much information on those.
One more question. Can you share an 11th hour edit change that had the most impact on the film?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, the big one's I Am Iron Man, which was something we shot at the very end of, we shot that weeks before we had to finish the movie. I mean, that was shot in, I think it was the last thing we shot. And it was during a late reshoot. So that was a big last minute thing that changed, the end of a big character, a moment that got like didn't work until the last possible minute until we had those pieces. We shot a bunch of Endgame. We did a lot of little things in that last week of reshooting that altered the movie for the better, and really made it all kind of come together. We did all those at the very last minute. Also, I think trying to think what else we've done that's been. Oh, well, the other one is, this is really 11th hour. So when we finished Avengers, Joss had this idea that it would be so great if we saw the Avengers like at the end of the movie all having shawarma together at a shawarma restaurant, because Tony makes.
Yeah.
So how are we going to do this? We were out of time, and we went, the only time we're going to have these people together is at the premiere. So we had the premiere for Avengers, but the day before the premiere, I think it was the day before, we got them all, and we went to this little restaurant on Pico in LA and put them into the costumes and shot the shawarma shot. And I'm like, Joss, the only way this is going to make it, it's not going to make it for the international version because those have already shipped. We can get it into domestic, but I have to take it to the lab tonight. So we're going to, as soon as we shoot it, we're going to dump it down onto my laptop, and we're going to go out to the camera truck, and we're going to put the lift gate up on the camera truck, and I'm going to cut it into the movie, and I'm going to play it back on my laptop, and you're going to say cut when you think we've held it on too long. And so we did like three or four takes, took the laptop out to the camera truck, and I played it for him. And we like, it all came down to a debate about what, like, the last chew. And we finally got the cut point, and I sent it to the lab, and that was literally cut in off the back of a truck the minutes after it was shot and sent out to the world, and it became this thing. But
that's awesome.
It was that a close one.
And I seem to recall reading that somewhere, but didn't somebody have a mustache or didn't have a mustache?
Yeah, Chris Evans had a beard.
Right.
Yeah. So he had this. They made this appliance for his mouth. They went around here like this and covered him, and he looked like Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was like, what are you doing? Evans, you look terrible. So they had to have him do this. If you look in the scene, he's like,
yeah. He's leaning forward. Yeah. All right, Jeff. Before I bring Hans back, I have one more question. It's just me.
Yeah.
And it's always the cherry on the cake, which is always what advice would you give anybody starting off in editorial? There's lots of people on our crew. By the way, Kelly Dixon says hi. She's been watching since the beginning.
Oh my gosh! Wow, cool.
Yeah. So two Marvel people on board here. Kelly was our first guest. It seems like 3 months ago now. Yeah, so what is your advice for people just starting off? And then we'll bring Hans back and wrap this up. But
well, I mean, I think the thing a lot of people ask me this question, and I think the thing that I say a lot is, the thing that I've come to feel like is a really important thing to understand that doesn't occur to people a lot is when you're looking to work on something or make something, it's really important that you think about what you want to work on. In other words, if you like horror movies, make horror movies. If you like comedies, make comedies. If you like independent cinema, do that. If you like superhero stuff, popular pop art, big entertainment, do that. If you like impersonal movies, do those. It's really bad when people think, oh, well, I'll just get any job I can. I know it's hard when you're starting out, but there are different sort of ecosystems of people making different kinds of movies. And if you can find your tribe and get into a place where you're connecting with other artists and craftspeople who are making the kind of material you want to make, you've got a much better chance of developing relationships, because movies are all about developing and building relationships with each other to collaborate, and you can't do it alone at all. And I found it's not about breaking in, it's about sort of getting a lot of people together and sort of walking all in the front door together. So having a network of people that you trust, that you like to work with, that you respect, that you feel are doing good work, I think it's really important. They'll keep you in check, and they'll pull you along. So it's really important not to go it alone. And then mostly if you love it, it's a great job. If you hate it, it's awful. I mean, I love it. I could do it all day long. And that I get paid for it. It's like, oh my God, you're paying me? I would do that. And I always say the editing's free. You're paying me to do all the phone calls and the logistics and the you're paying me for the stuff I don't like, but I'll do the editing for free.
It's like you don't want to tell them, by the way, I love this so much, I would do it for free. But you can keep paying me if you like.
I would, but if you're gonna make me do if I have to do quality control passes or whatever, like all the logisticy stuff that you have to do to deliver stuff, that's a pain. But actually cutting and working with directors and screening is so fun. So anyway, I'd say just do it a lot. If you like it, do it as much as you can. Find ways to do it. The more you do something, the better you'll get at it, but also that's where the opportunities come from.
Excellent advice, Jeff. And we'll bring Hans back, but the last 90 minutes flew by, and
oh my God,
I feel like I finally had my opportunity to chat with you. I know we chatted a couple last week, but
oh sure, yeah, no, it's great talking.
I could keep going for a couple more hours, but I can't thank you enough, and I'm in awe of your work, and I can't wait to see what you got coming next. So
well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to be on this. It's so cool.
Well, and it was absolutely fantastic, and you guys could keep talking for another hour. Listening for another hour.
The first hour, I felt like I was like, "Wait a minute, I'm just having a conversation." Oh wait, there's a bunch of people watching. I should think about them.
Amazing stories, and I don't think I'll eat shawarma the same ever again. Yeah. And thank Jeff and Paul. Thank you so much for that fantastic conversation. So insightful. And Jeff, we had you in Toronto a while ago when we could do these things live. Hopefully we can do that again. But this was equally amazing as that time that we had you live with us at the office in Toronto. So thank you. Fantastic. Well,
thanks for having me. It was so fun. And yeah, this has been just great. I'm so honored to be part of it.
It's entirely our pleasure. To those watching, please join us in 2 days, this Thursday, for a masterclass featuring groundbreaking, award-winning director Michelle Latimer. It continues to be an amazing ride, and I hope it's providing some relief, entertainment, and no doubt, as always, lots of inspiration in these incredibly challenging times. Be safe, everyone. Be well. Have a great night. Jeff and Paul, thank you so very much for spending this time with us. An absolute pleasure.
Attaboy. Thank you again, Hans, for putting these together. I know they're a lot of work, and so I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Great work.
We'll do more.
All right. Excellent.
All right.
Well.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Hans. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.